Check this out. When you're going through movement, do you find that your spine gets bound up and stiff? Or maybe when you go through thoracic rotation, you're finding that you're getting pain and sensation into your lower back or other unwanted areas. There's good reason for that. Your body is trying to tell you something. And in this video, you're gonna learn what the body is saying and what it is exactly you can do about it. I want you to try something. Put your arms up like this and lean back as far as you can. Now imagine you have a laser pointer on your sternum and try to rotate from side to side and just take note of what your range of motion is as well as what that feels like. Now keeping that same position, let's try the opposite extreme. So same deal, you're gonna take your arms up, but now we're gonna compress the structure. Imagining that the laser pointer is pointing towards the ground. You'll go through the same rotation from side to side and just take note of how that feels and what your range of motion is. How'd it go? It probably didn't feel too good, I would presume. One of the most important factors that we have to look out for when we're trying to improve thoracic rotation is looking at the relationship between where the shoulders, rib cage, and hips are in space, and how close or how far away from neutral are we. And what we just did there was take you through both extreme versions away from neutral, both in that extension tone as well as in the flexion tone. So you have an idea as to what rotation feels like when we're at these polar extremes. So whether you find yourself more in extension or flexion, first and foremost, we want to get a baseline of where neutral is. And we want to be able to utilize that in a more intuitive way. And then once we have a sense of where, we can start to introduce the how. Let's get into both of those right now. So where is neutral? Well, let's find out how to get there. You're gonna grab yourself a yoga block and you can just pop down on a seat. You can also do this on a floor in a kneeling position if that's what you prefer. And what we're gonna do is take our elbows in front of us and we're gonna work on finding what this magical neutral is. Now, how you can kind of view neutral is a more optimal way for our muscles and joints to communicate and integrate with one another. It's not a place that we're always going to exist in, but it's a good kind of safe place or safe haven for our body to operate from. So grabbing your yoga block, a water bottle, or a book in front of you like so, we're gonna try to keep some height in our skeleton. We're not gonna allow ourselves to compress because as you probably felt, we're a little bit limited in rotation as we go through that. But we're also not gonna lean back and get too much into extension. The reason why I wanted you to go through both extreme versions of that is so you can find the midpoint between that. So I'm gonna keep some height in my skeleton. I'm gonna bring my elbows away from me. And this is just gonna bring my shoulders into a little bit more of a protracted position because a lot of the time when we're limited with thoracic rotation, it's because we're in an excess of retraction of the scaps, or we're actually using the scapulas to take us through rotation rather than primary muscle drivers, say like the obliques as an example. So once we kind of find this position here, we're just gonna focus on sustaining this upright position. And I want you to start to breathe into two different areas simultaneously. So you're gonna try to breathe into your mid-spine or your mid-back at the same time that you start to breathe almost in between your collarbones, or you can think about volumizing the pecs with the breath. So all we're gonna work on is just maintaining this position, getting a sense of what neutral feels like, and it should almost feel like the rib cage is stacked more or less right on top of the pelvis here. Something that might help you is if you get the sit bones a little bit further back on whatever it is that you're sitting on. That's gonna allow your lower spine to kind of come into that natural lordosis. And then we're just gonna focus on creating space around it. I would recommend working through this for anywhere between 60 to 90 seconds, just taking those full breaths kind of into the mid-spine, into the chest cavity, and just getting a good idea of what pressure and breathing into different areas of your body feels like while you're holding this position. Now I'm sure you're wondering, Mark, this is all well and good, but I came here to rotate my spine, not breathe. So let's get into some rotation. Keep the same yoga block. You're gonna come into an elevated position on the one hand. And we're just gonna first be mindful that the knees are stacked right underneath the hips. And what we're gonna do is start in that neutral position. So we did that intentionally so that it could translate into this more rotational element exercise. So what we're gonna do is make sure that the scapulas start in a protraction. You can think about exhaling and kind of clamping or closing off the ribs on the front side, because ideally we wanna start to use the muscles around the obliques to start to drive this thoracic rotation. So to start with, we'll get the scapulas into that protraction. I'm gonna start to pull my right elbow back at the same time that I'm pressing my left hand down into the book or the yoga block. And then we're gonna come back to that laser pointer analogy, where I'm gonna now try to point the laser pointer towards you. So I can feel my left oblique really coming online here. I'm almost rolling or tilting into that slightly. And then we're gonna unwind and take the upper body back to neutral. I'll maybe take a reset breath here. I'll come back to my row. I'm gonna kind of fall and rotate through that left oblique. I can really feel that's coming online. And we're just being mindful here that the lumbar isn't in an excess of anterior tilt, because we do wanna try to keep the hips relatively neutral as we're going through this rotational element. What I would suggest here is first starting off slow. Probably think about going 3 to 4 seconds through the rotation, taking an inhale at the end range, 3 to 4 second reset, and then we'll start to make it more dynamic as you start to get more of a sense and a feel for it. Probably work through anywhere between 12 and 14 intentional repetitions here. Just taking your time, making sure that you're activating the right musculature to take you through that thoracic rotation. So let's take this up a notch. I'm gonna come down to your level. We're gonna get into a horse stance, or kind of this wide base. I'll give you a nice crispy B-roll so you know what that horse stance looks like. And you're gonna kind of find this position, and you're gonna create an imaginary hoop with your arms. So imagine that you're trying to shoot some buckets right through this imaginary hoop that I'm creating with my shoulders. And we're getting into that same sort of position with the shoulders that we have been working on this whole time. So I'm not letting my shoulders and the humerus here get jacked up towards my ears, and I'm also not gonna be in that excess of retraction. So what we'll do is find that horse stance position. We're gonna keep the center of gravity low. You're gonna create that imaginary hoop, and you're gonna create a squeeze against your handy dandy yoga block, your book, water bottle, whatever it be. And now we're gonna keep the center of gravity low while we keep the shoulders in front, keeping the skeleton tall. And we're gonna start to incorporate a rotation over to one side, and then we're gonna rotate over the other side. Now, as we're going through this is gonna start to challenge things like the T-spine, the obliques, the hips, all the musculature down and through the legs. And we can even start to incorporate a little bit of a weight transfer. So as I rotate over to my right, I'm gonna shift a little bit more weight to my right. I'm probably getting even a little bit of a stretch through this left side, which feels nice. Then we're gonna lead with the arms. I'm gonna come over to the left, and I'm gonna commit some weight to that left side. And now I'm creating some length through that right side. This is building on all the elements of the exercises that we did beforehand. So I am trying to keep some pressure in through my upper body as I'm going through this. I'm being really mindful that my shoulders are staying connected via the squeeze against the object of your choice, and that you're just kind of sensing the ground and keeping the hips relatively stable as you're going through this motion. I would work through anywhere between 10 to 12 repetitions here on each side as you go through, and really try your best to not let your center of gravity be changing. Once you set your center of gravity, for now, just focus on sustaining that, creating stability through the pelvis. And now we're just letting the thoracic spine and the upper body kind of almost move like a spindle on top of that stability that we're creating from the pelvis. So a lot of the work we have been doing has been very much about stability, connecting the primary muscles to thoracic rotation. But what good is all this rigidity if we don't start to add some fluidity and rhythm to it? When you look at the best athletes or people who just move really well, they tend to have this kind of rhythmic aspect to their movement. So what we want to start to incorporate is some level of rhythm. And we're going to do so through one of my favorite exercises. This is probably an exercise that I use almost every day and definitely every time prior to going into any type of workout. And that is a rhythmic arm swing. So it's gonna build on the previous exercise we just did where we had the block here, but now we're gonna just allow the T-spine and that weight transfer to begin to happen in a more fluid way. So what's happening here is I'm taking one arm into a external rotation, or really I'm just taking my left palm up, and then my right palm is gonna be down, and I'm letting my upper body kind of rotate over that one leg. Then my arm is gonna start to go, my arms will switch as I go through that, and now I'm on top of my right side with my arms in the opposite position. And really all we're trying to work on and practice here is almost letting some of that tension go. So we're maybe gonna keep a baseline of it because we do want things to be connected and stable, but we don't want to be like a robot where we're super rigid. We want to allow our body to go through these ranges of motion in that rhythmic and fluid way. This is going to allow the tissues to go through kind of their natural motion of getting length and contraction as you move through space, as well as you're developing some underlying elasticity through your body as you're going through this type of motion. I would work through this for anywhere between 30 to 45 seconds. Don't be ashamed if you don't feel like you can get the coordination or the fluidity straight away. It's probably gonna feel awkward to begin with, but just like anything else, as you go through it, as you start to work on these other exercises, it's gonna become more intuitive and fluid, just like anything else. As you've come to learn, our ability to create thoracic rotation is largely dictated by where our skeleton is sitting in space. Typically, when people have difficulty finding neutral in the upper body, it's due to what's happening downstream, and there being potentially excessive rotations or tilts of the pelvis. If this sounds familiar or like something you'd like to learn more about, you can find a video I did on that right here. That took me 4 takes, by the way.